Chapter 1. Venturing in the Burlesque Universe. If you're still rather new, or even completely new to burlesque, you may not be familiar with the origins of the art form, or with its most famous stars from the early days. It's important to learn a bit about the way it all started, especially if you intend to perform professionally. Type burlesque into any search engine or YouTube, and you will get an array of very diverse results, going from a movie with Christina Aguilera to can-can dancer outfits on eBay, with mentions of Italian theater and stripper shoes provider thrown in for good measure. Let's dive into the history of this fascinating world. Know your burlesque history. The origins of burlesque. What is burlesque really, and where did it all start? A quick research on the Oxford Dictionary will give you two answers. One stating that burlesque is an absurd or comically exaggerated imitation of something, especially in a literary or dramatic work, a parody. The other, more recent definition will tell you that burlesque nowadays is a variety show, typically including striptease. So how on earth did burlesque go from theater and literature to stripping on stage? In the 17th century, burlesque was a theatrical and literary genre in which women often played men parts. This was done to get laughs from the audience, but at the same time, it meant that women on stage wore tights that showed the shape of their legs, a rather daring feat for the times, or ooh la la in French. Burlesque was brought to America and became an instant hit there. The first burlesque troupe to come to the country was called the British Blondes, who caused an outrage when they showed up in men's clothes, again, showing more legs than was common in those times. Obviously, the scandal meant their show was an instant hit, and soon burlesque was an integral part of American variety shows, with the appeal relying largely on being able to see women wearing less than was acceptable in society. Scandals and hoochie-coochie. Whilst England moves towards different types of entertainment in the Edwardian era, burlesque continued being popular in the U.S., and slowly started to move towards the form we know today. Comedy acts slowly became purely dancing acts, with more and more revealing clothing. Meanwhile, in late 19th century France, the Moulin Rouge and the Folies Bergères opened, both showcasing French can-can dancers performing daring kicks and revealing their undergarments. Burlesque gradually became more risque and integrated a lot of belly dancing influences, with suggestive hoochie-coochie dances gaining popularity. The 1930s is hailed as the decade when burlesque became truly innovative, and some stars from the era invented routines that are still used as an inspiration to these days. We will come back to them very shortly. Then, sadly, morality laws and censorship started taking their toll on the business. Burlesque lingered until the late 50s, but its heydays were gone. That is, until its incredible revival which started in the 1990s with Dita Von Teese. Vintage Burlesque Queens, Gypsy Rose Lee. Let's meet a few of the early burlesque queens who made the art form what it is today. You will soon find out that many of the classic burlesque routines you know and love are actualizations from older routines, invented by the pioneers of the style. Knowing a few of the veterans of the style will help you choose your own preferred burlesque style, and will give you ideas when creating your burlesque stage persona. Firstly, it's impossible to talk about classic burlesque stars without mentioning Gypsy Rose Lee. Gypsy got hired as a burlesque dancer in a small theater. Legend has it that as she was dancing on stage, her dress strap snapped, and she ended up making the accident a part of her routine. Gypsy Rose Lee very quickly became a star, and by the mid-1940s she was the main performer at Minsky's. She was known as the intellectual stripper. She put the T's in striptease, sometimes barely revealing anything at all. Her most famous routine, The Psychology of a Stripteaser, can be found easily online and is a lesson to all budding burlesque dancers in the art of teasing and keeping the audience entertained. Her stripping style is rarely replicated these days, but she certainly has heiresses in the burlesque world today. Jo Weldon in New York, for example, has been performing and writing about burlesque since the late 90s, and continuing in the same intellectual burlesque vein Gypsy invented. Now, for our second classic burlesque star. If you've been to burlesque shows or watched any documentary about burlesque, you've certainly seen routines performed with large feather fans. We'll get back to the technique behind this classic intricate dance later. Let's focus on its creator. Sally Rand, the fan dance star. It is rumored that Sally's iconic fan dance, still emulated to these days, started by accident. A young Sally bought very large ostrich fans with the intention to turn them into a dress for an audition later during the day. When it turned out she had no time to do so, she went to the audition wearing the fans only. Sally performed with a flesh-colored outfit that made her appear entirely naked under her fans. Her famous routine was widely copied by other burlesque dancers. In fact, other performers claim to have invented it, but that's a story for another time. Fan dances are still a staple of any burlesque performer's routine portfolio nowadays. And it's not the only classic routine Sally Rand invented. She also created a routine that saw her perform into a giant bubble, partly so she could deal with the cold when performing outdoors. She certainly started the love story between burlesque dancers and giant props. An updated version of this routine can be seen in the classic balloon pop, often enjoyed by newcomers to the world of burlesque performance. We'll come back to it shortly. Lily St. Cyr's bathtub. Only one classic burlesque star from the 1940s era became more famous and better paid than Gypsy Rose Lee, and her stage name was Lily St. Cyr. She was famous for performing in transparent bathtubs, which got her arrested, and inspired countless modern performers, notably the Queen of Burlesque, Dita Von Teese, who regularly performs in tubs and man-size martini glasses. A routine popularized by Venus Delight, another legend. Bump and grind and tassel twirling. Hoochie Coochie, inspired by belly dancing, marked a sexier turn in the history of burlesque. Many claim Little Egypt was the first to bring a belly dancing feel to her dancing at the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. By the 1950s, Hoochie Coochie had become bump and grind, a style still widely practiced by burlesque dancers over the world today. Golden era stars of burlesque bump and grind include notably Crystal Starr and Tempest Storm, the living legend who only retired in 2012, age 82. To conclude our section on classic burlesque stars, I would like to mention the living legend that is Satan's angel, the devil's own mistress, Queen of the Fire Tassels. Satan's angel started performing in the 1960s and quickly became famous on the burlesque scene for her extravagant stage persona. She invented a tassel-turning trick rarely emulated since. She would set fire to her nipple tassels and turn energetically until the fire would die out. The different types of burlesque. Find which appeals to you the most and develop your style. Learning a little bit about the different types of burlesque is important, as it will help you decide what you like most and where you want to take your burlesque persona and your acts. Don't worry if you're not sure yet. Your style might change a lot during your career, and that's perfectly fine. You can also decide to switch between styles, have classic routines and more experimental ones. After all, burlesque is all about freedom. Let's have a little overview of different styles of burlesque. The classic versus neo debate. I cannot start this chapter without talking about the core of many debates in the burlesque industry, the infamous classic burlesque versus neo-burlesque talk. Ask any burlesque dancer or any burlesque enthusiast about their opinion regarding the difference between classic and neo-burlesque, and you will probably hear a different opinion from every performer. Diving into the details would require a full book. Commonly, however, when people oppose classic/traditional burlesque to neo-burlesque, they will picture classic burlesque as a showgirl affair, all glamour, rhinestones, sequins, feather fans, boas, and long gowns, whereas neo-burlesque will be seen as something more avant-garde and might cover anything from comedy burlesque to art performances or nerdy performances. Some go as far as saying that neo-burlesque is in fact closer in style to the golden age of the art form and the wit of Gypsy than to the stripping aspect which came later. That said, whether you consider yourself to be a traditional performer or a neo-burlesque performer, there is a wide range of styles you can explore. Traditional burlesque can encompass showgirl, vaudeville, comedy, anything that brings the audience back to the golden era or to the 1950s burlesque queens. If what you love in burlesque is the glamour, the mind-blowing sparkly outfits, if you dream of being a 1940s/1950s movie star, if you have a love of all things vintage and fancy yourself a modern-day pin-up, then traditional showgirl burlesque is made for you. If you have a love for the golden era stars, if you admire the wit of Gypsy Rose Lee, if you want your routine to make the audience laugh, then explore the comedy and vaudeville options. Neo-burlesque often adds a layer of current pop culture, gender exploration, and/or performance art. The 2000s saw the birth of nerd burlesque, for example, with performers catering to the audience's love of sci-fi TV shows and movies. Check out the Suicide Girls' Blackheart burlesque stormtrooper routine, for example. Burlesque offers the possibility for men and women to explore their gender, sensuality, and sexuality in ways that wouldn't be possible in other art forms. Take the example of the world-famous Bob, who self-describes as a female-female spiritual transsexual and turns the ideas we have about women and femininity on their head. I am only grazing the top of the iceberg here. There is almost as many different styles of burlesque as there are performers. You will find your own way. The important thing is that you keep learning about the art form, keep watching videos of vintage performances, keep going to shows to see newcomers and stars of our times, and figure out what works best for you. Who will you be on stage? Now, we've had a quick overview of the history of burlesque. You're a bit more familiar with its legends, and you're aware burlesque performances can be traditional and glamorous, or daring and revolutionary, or a mix of both. Let's dive deeper and consider a few styles that are widely known in the industry. See which appeals to you the most. It will help you in deciding what type of routine you would like to be doing. Cheesecake burlesque. Cheesecake is a style of burlesque and, like its name indicates, it relies on acting a bit cheesy. This is your super cute, winking, falsely innocent, girl next door burlesque. Influenced by the 1950s pinup imagery, with wide-eyed beauties accidentally revealing a bit too much. Think Betty Page and her innocent smile even in her sexier shoots. Or old pinup drawings that are still so popular these days. Cheesecake burlesque is very character-driven. It relies a lot on the personality of the performer and on facial expressions. It incorporates a lot of comedy and acting aspects, and does not necessarily rely on the dance moves as much. Cheesecake burlesque is great if, as a beginner, you don't have the confidence to go all out on the sexiness and feel more comfortable being cute, cheeky, and less aggressively sexual. It's also perfect if you feel more like a performer than a dancer. Cheesecake is also very tongue-in-cheek and funny, sometimes even a bit silly. So if you fancy yourself as much as a stripper as a comedian, it's definitely the one for you. If you want your audience to laugh, but also revel in your sexy side in a cute way, you might want to check out some famous cheesecake routines and see if that might work for you. Anna Phylaxis is the queen of the genre. Check out her Betty Page routine. Showgirl. Showgirl burlesque is a promoter's favorite. This is what most people think of when they hear burlesque. Whereas cheesecake burlesque is more character-driven, showgirl burlesque is all about the glamour. It's a throwback to the golden era and vintage Hollywood stars. Think rhinestones, feathers, vintage hairdos, and makeup, elaborate costumes, giant props, and champagne bottles. The most famous performer of the showgirl style is, of course, Dita Von Teese, who is famous for performing in huge martini glasses in bejeweled costumes. Catherine Delish, Betsy Bonbon, Immodesty Blaze, and Suki Singapora are other famous faces who perform showgirl burlesque. Showgirl burlesque is for you if you have a love for all things glamorous. If you've always dreamt of being a vintage starlet. If you're more Marilyn Monroe than Betty Page. Showgirl burlesque reveals an ultra-femininity and implies to have beautifully crafted costumes and props, which is doable on a budget, as we will see later. Neo-burlesque. Neo-burlesque, as we saw earlier, can mean and encompass many things, but is usually considered as anything not classic, or some say as any burlesque performed since the revival of the scene. There are many subgenres of burlesque that have appeared since the late 1990s. Gorelesque, a horror take on burlesque, with routines often inspired by classic horror movies, or nerdlesque, nerdy burlesque with routines inspired by superheroes, fantasy or sci-fi movies, and video games, for example, as well as many other examples that do not fit in the classic showgirl burlesque category. The choice of songs is also often different in neo-burlesque. Whereas vintage-inspired performers might often choose vintage songs or classical music, neo-burlesque performers tend to go for songs that are not typically associated with burlesque. Rock music, movie soundtrack, everything is permitted. Comedy. Comedy burlesque puts the emphasis on playing a character and telling a story to the audience. Many classic or neo-burlesque routines have elements of comedy, and cheesecake burlesque is often also funny. Comedy burlesque sometimes involves little stripping and teasing. Boylesque. Boylesque is simply burlesque performed by men. There are more women burlesque dancers, however. There are more and more men performers who evolve in an array of different styles. Check out Warren Speed for comedy burlesque, Tom Harlow for old-school Hollywood glamour and fetish routines. So you see, there are many different styles of burlesque you could perform. You don't have to choose now, nor at all if you prefer. You can have various routines in different styles. Of course, your persona might evolve with time, and you might find yourself doing something very different a few months or a few years into your career. Changing and evolving is part of the journey. Pick a unique name. If your burlesque persona is very well defined, for example, if you intend to perform mostly cheesecake vintage with a 50s vintage feel, or if you have a gimmick or specialty, like breathing fire or hula hooping, then you could find a name that will tell the audience what you're about. Otherwise, try to find a name that you really like or means something to you, as it's not always easy to rebrand later once people know you under a certain name. Burlesque performers who mostly perform classic showgirls business tend to go for vintage-style names. Dita Von Teese, Catherine Delish, Betsy Rose, Roxy Delight. Foreign-sounding names are also a hit. Michelle L'Amour, Lulu La Duchesse de Rire, Lola Vanella. Alliterations are well-liked and easy to remember. Betsy Bonbon, Havana Hurricane, Bella Blue. Some names are humoristic or play on words. Jet Adore, Geez Louise, Carmen Have a Look, Dirty Martini. The important is that your name is original and unique. Check that nobody else does burlesque under that name. Know your audience. One last note on the different types of burlesque. Some styles might work better in particular countries. Comedy and nerd burlesque, for example, is becoming extremely popular in the US. In the UK, more and more shows feature daring, original performances, with London Burlesque Festival even having a twisted review dedicated in the wonderful and the bizarre in burlesque. In Eastern Europe, the burlesque comeback is more recent, and a lot of the events feature more traditional showgirl burlesque, or an updated version with less stripping and more dancing. Think Burlesque, the movie with Cher and Christina Aguilera. In France, there are many small cabarets that have opened and offer performances as far removed from the Crazy Horse or the Moulin Rouge as you can imagine, with daring, gender-bending, humoristic acts. Check out Le Cabaret Burlesque in Lyon, for example. Knowing your audience will certainly help you decide what acts to put forward when you apply to shows, but don't forget that the essential is to do what you love. Now we've had a brief overview of various burlesque styles and have an idea of which style you prefer. Let's focus on a few classic routines you might want to add to your repertoire. These 3 routines are certainly traditional, though you can make them your own and update them to your taste. A few traditional routines. The balloon pop and how to perform it successfully. Let's start with a routine particularly loved by newcomers and seasoned performers alike. The balloon pop requires very little costume-wise. A bag of balloons ready to blow, nipple pasties or tassels, underwear, and stockings/heels if you wish. The principle is simple too. The performer starts with an array of balloons covering their body, then pops the balloons one by one, or sometimes 2 at a time for added effect, until they are in their underwear or pasties. The performer may use a needle, a hairpin, a feather, or anything they choose to blow the balloons. One of the most famous current balloon pop routines is performed with Dirty Martini, and she blows them with a lit cigarette. There are many ways to hide your pins, or whatever you want to use to pop your balloons, on stage. Have a look at Vendetta Vane's balloon routine, for example, where she dresses as a cowgirl and uses a pin hidden in a fake gun. Now there are a few things to consider when you want to perform a balloon pop routine. The space. Where will you change? This is an important consideration, as in the event you find yourself sharing a tiny changing room/toilet/bathroom with other performers, you may not have space to blow your balloons. How will you blow the balloons? You can use a pump or do it yourself, but bear in mind that if you want to hide glitter in the balloons for maximum effect when they pop, you will be better off using a pump as to avoid any wetness. What happens to the burst balloons? Whilst you can leave them in place after bursting them, this might ruin the aspect of your costume/underwear underneath. Ideally, tie the balloons to a piece of string or elastic that you can easily remove once the balloon is popped. What if the balloon refuses to pop? It might happen, after all. On-stage mishaps are part of the business. If a stubborn balloon refuses to pop the first time, don't panic. Just strike a pose, pull an oops face or a cheeky smile, and try again. As long as you stay composed, a balloon not popping at the first try will not ruin your act. Hit that beat. The best balloon pop routines I've seen were those that the performer had perfectly timed to the music used. One of my favorite balloon pop routines is the highly humoristic balloon pop kiss by Goodness Gracious. Each pop works perfectly with the timing of the music. A balloon pop routine doesn't have to be classic. You can make it your own. Make it funny, use an original song, tell a story. Don't forget the preparation basics, and have fun with it. You can even ask audience members to pop balloons for you if the stage allows for audience participation. It will also solve the issue of those particularly hard-to-reach balloons. A timeless classic, The Art of Fan Dancing. I have already mentioned fan dancing a few times in this book, and how could I not? Fan dances are the epitome of burlesque. Since Sally Rand first popularized the act with her oversized white ostrich fans and her flesh costume, fan dances acts have been a staple in burlesque events. There has been at least one fan dance in pretty much every burlesque show I've ever seen. There again, like for the balloon pop, there are a few basics to learn before doing a fan dance routine, and then you can make it your own. A fan dance might be the most iconic and widely known burlesque routine over the world, and promoters often specifically look for fan dances when booking shows, so having one in your repertoire might help you get booked. There are a few things to consider before starting. Firstly, big fans are heavy. Trust me on this. The first time I did a fan dance workshop with Aurora Galore, my hands and arms hurt for days. Check out her avalanche routine on YouTube, and bear in mind her huge fans are incredibly heavy. You'll be astonished. For a beginner, bamboo staves are preferable as they are much lighter. The downside is you cannot have as many layers of feathers put on them as they wouldn't support the weight. Still, if you're just starting out, or if you want to include a small fan dance section in one of your acts, getting spadone feathers, male ostrich feathers, fans on bamboo staves is the cheapest and lightest option. This is also the best option if you want to do a very quick fan dance, as they will allow you to move faster. Now, if you want that glamorous, thick fan look, you want to look at triple or quadruple layers of ostrich fans. Those will not hold on bamboo staves, and you will probably have to get plastic ones. Much sturdier, but also more difficult to handle, and certainly painful at first. On the plus side, they will look fantastic. The classic burlesque stars such as Sally Rand and Faith Bacon use the luxury version of ostrich fans with ostrich feather boas. This is also what Dita Von Teese and Catherine D'Lish use, as well as Michelle L'Amour in her famous Sally Rand tribute act. They will take you more time to get accustomed to, and you will need to move slower, but they certainly have that glamorous star quality. Quality versus price. Be aware that good quality feather fans are expensive. Whilst you can get a pair for around $100, they will certainly not be triple-layered ostrich fans like professionals use. It's fine if you're just starting out and you want to try out fans, or if you just want to integrate fans towards the end of your routine for a quick fan dance reveal, but don't expect them to have the same impact as more expensive fans. If your intention is to do a Sally Rand-style classic routine with slow, sensual moves, then you might need to think about investing more. How to use your fans. There are many ways you can integrate fans in a routine. You can do a full fan dance routine, where the focus will be on your dancing and ability and handling the fans for most of the routine. Performers who execute this type of routine typically only wear a nude costume, or pasties and a merkin or G-string underneath, and use the fans to conceal themselves for the major part of the routine. The whole act then relies on the tease and on the performer's moves. This type of act is very traditional and often booked by promoters for its glamorous value, but it will not work if your fans are cheap and lack coverage, or if you don't know how to use them. Another popular option is the fan dance as a way to end an act. In this case, the performer will often strip to their underwear, then pick up the fans and tease the audience for a bit longer, usually removing their bra whilst doing a fan dance, finally doing the big reveal at the end. Sometimes the dance will go on for a bit longer after the reveal. Fan dances do not have to be classic. You can make them your own in a variety of ways. For example, you could choose to use something other than fans, like Scarlet Rose and her fan dance performed with rose petals. Or you could pick fans in a different color or type of feathers, like Miss Twilight Sparkly and her peacock fan dance. Suki Singapora uses traditional Asian fans instead of feathers. Finally, if you want to get an idea of which moves you could do with big fans, or simply to add a bit of glam and feathers to your routine, you can also buy mini feather fans. These are often used in burlesque lessons to teach the students various moves and poses, and they can be integrated in group or solo routines. Dita's specialty: the glass routine. A few tips. Now for another renowned burlesque routine. I give you the Martini Glass Act. You have probably heard of the Martini Glass routine, as it has been widely popularized by Dita Von Teese. But if she certainly is the most famous performer to use a glass prop, she is not the only one. Catherine Delish performs in a champagne glass, and even has a duet routine with Dita. The oversized glass routine has become so popular that now many companies offer to book a glass for corporate events, and then book burlesque dancers to perform inside them. If you start getting booked for corporate or fashion events, then this might be something you will be offered to do. So here's a few tips in case you ever perform in a giant glass. First of all, be careful. These glasses are really high and really slippery. It might seem like fun and games, and you might think it's easy to look glamorous while splashed in a beautifully oversized champagne or martini glass, but I would actually not recommend accepting this kind of gig unless you're sure you can dance in a rather perilous setting and are a bit more experienced. If you look at one of Dita Von Teese's glass routines, for example, she often stands, bends, and performs many intricate poses in and out of the glass, and even on the border of the glass. This requires both strength and flexibility, as well as good footing, and enough experience to look graceful and make it look easy. If you become a professional burlesque dancer and you fancy getting your own giant glass, remember as usual to make the routine your own. The Martini Glass routine is a trademark, and it might be hard to perform an original routine with this prop. Miss Carrie Ann, for example, performs the routine as a Dita tribute. On the other hand, nothing prevents you from offering your own original take on the idea. Suki Singapora had a giant engagement ring built with a tiny pool in lieu of a diamond, thus creating a new original act based on the same classic idea. Velma Von Bon Bon offers her own comedy vision of the oversized glass act. She feigns to discover her new prop's measurements are slightly off, before launching into an acrobatic and hilarious routine to reach it. Bear in mind that this kind of prop is more appropriate for dancers who have a bit more experience, and don't forget the practical considerations. A large prop will need to be transported to the venues. It might also be unsuitable for smaller venues, but we will get back to these points in the props section. We've seen the basics, you know where burlesque came from, and you've learned a few famous names. You've discovered some classic routines and have an idea of different styles. It's time to think about taking your own first steps into the world of performance.